Welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast, where we break down the complex and emotional process of divorce into manageable, easy-to-understand steps. I'm your host, Greer Howard, and with me is Bobby Buchanan, widely recognized as one of Illinois' top divorce attorneys, offering unmatched insight and experience in family law. Well, welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast, where we break down the complicated and emotional process of divorce into manageable and easy-to-understand steps. I am your host, Greer Howard, and today I am so excited to be here with one of Illinois' top divorce attorneys. I am with Bobby Buchanan, who's going to be offering his unmatched insight and experience with his family law firm. And today we are diving into a very crucial topic for many divorcing couples, mediation. So mediation can be a very effective and often less stressful way to resolve disputes when you're going through a divorce. So Bobby, hi, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Greer. Thank you so much for hosting this episode. And today we're talking about one of my favorite parts of divorce, actually. It's weird to say favorite when we're talking about divorce, but mediation certainly falls within that category.
Yes. I feel like if you can get to mediation and you can come up with something, it is a great way to go about your divorce, because that means you're communicating together, which we all like. So why don't we start with the basics, Bobby? Why don't you just sort of tell us, what exactly is mediation specifically in the context of divorce?
Absolutely. So mediation is a structured approach to coming up with an agreement. And the key part of mediation is that you have a mediator. And a mediator is what we call a third-party neutral. And that's just kind of a legalese way of saying someone in the middle who's going to help you have the conversation, who's not in your favor, who's not in your spouse's favor, and whose ultimate goal is to try to facilitate an agreement between you two.
Okay, so I'm liking this. It's the collaborative approach that the mediator is really trying to help you with. So what would you say is the goal? What is a couple trying to get out of mediation?
Yeah, the goal is the ultimate final product that you need to finalize your divorce. People often ask us, how long is my divorce going to take? And the answer is, well, it's going to take as long as it does to come up with an agreement. And that agreement is what we call the marital settlement agreement. And that's like a 10 to 15 page document that lays out everything that we need to figure out in a divorce. So we need to figure out how you and your spouse are going to divide any property you have, including your real estate, what's going to happen with the mortgage. We need to figure out, of course, if you have kids, how are we going to co-parent the kids? What's the schedule going to be? Is there going to be child support? How much is it going to be? Is there going to be spousal support? What's going to happen with the debts? Every single thing that, is you guys are tied up with as far as your marriage, we need to come to an agreement. So the ultimate goal of mediation is to come up with an agreement for every one of those things. Take that agreement, give it to an attorney, and that attorney drafts a final marital settlement agreement, and then you're divorced.
Okay, so that's a lot of things to cover, Bobby, when you think about that. And ideally, during this process, this is a conversation, right? So the conversation with this couple that's going through the divorce. And in a way, is the mediator almost keeping the couple on track?
Yeah, exactly. So the best way to get your divorce done, is to not even have to go to mediation. I think most people start in that way. They start having a talk with their spouse, and you guys get on the same page that there is going to be a divorce. And then maybe over the kitchen table, you start talking about, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with the house? What are we going to do about the kids? But what often happens is that it's not just a robotic conversation. It's really emotional. This is someone that you once were deeply in love with, enough so that you decided to spend your whole lives together, and that didn't work out. But because it's so emotional, those dinner table conversations can go off track. And that's where a mediator can come in, is where you need someone to help kind of cool the emotions, keep you focused, and keep that conversation going.
Okay, I'm liking this. It seems less stressful. Would you say it's potentially less stressful if you have this mediator with you to kind of help you through the process so that you don't end up right in a court battle?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about divorce and divorce court is that you just show up and you say, okay, judge, tell us what to do or decide how our case should go. And it doesn't work that way. If you throw your case to the hands of the judge, it's going to take a really long time. The judge is not going to make decisions at the speed that you want. And it's really stressful to have to go to court and deal with lawyers and deal with judges and deal with all the litigation that's involved. I always want my clients to avoid that sort of litigation. So mediation is one of the number one steps that we can use to avoid the stress, the anxiety, the length, the expense, all of those bad things that we hear about divorce. Mediation can solve a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like mediation can really keep things civil, help the couple to, cooperate with each other. And this makes me think, okay, so let's talk a little bit about the benefits of mediation. You sort of started to touch on a few because one of the things that I think a lot of people think about is the cost, how much a divorce is going to cost. And it sounds like maybe a benefit of having this mediator is, avoiding some of this longer process. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, the average cost of a divorce in Illinois, the last time I checked and looked at our own cases and other firms' cases, is somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000. It's not a little bit. And the reason divorces cost that much is because people can't come to agreements. So attorneys have to get more involved. The court has to get more involved. And once you get the court involved, then there's this whole other layer of deadlines and responsibilities and due diligence and all these other little steps that happen in court. And so if we can avoid that, we can make the cost go way down. Like we're talking a quarter or a third of the average divorce cost when you go the mediation route.
Wow. Okay. Well, that in itself is such a huge motivation. What an incentive to not have to spend the most when it comes to money, because divorce can be very expensive. And if you're able to save, I know that a lot of couples would certainly appreciate that. And another thing, time is money and it can take a while. I mean, talk about, the time of getting divorced and maybe how a mediator can help with that timeline.
Yeah, sure. So mediation is, and especially if you do private mediation, is on your schedule, is on your and your spouse's schedule. It'll move as quickly as you can cooperate. And generally, mediators want to keep the momentum going so you can have multiple mediation sessions within a month or, maybe even a couple in a week and really make progress quickly. On the other hand, if you go into court, we're talking court dates that are 30 to 45 to even 90 days apart. And then when you go to court, it's so disappointing when you go to court because all that happens is the judge will say, what's the status of the case? And the attorneys say, well, we exchanged some documents, judge. We're working on settlement. We'd like another court date. And the judge will say, okay, and then give you another court date 45 to 60 days out. Before you know it, you're 6 months into your divorce and it feels like nothing has really happened. Whereas if you go the mediation route, it's possible to get it wrapped up in a matter of weeks, maybe a couple months. It's a drastic difference.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible to think about. And I hadn't even thought about, the flexibility with your schedule, the ability to sort of pick the dates when it works for you and your ex-spouse and when it works for your attorneys, as opposed to like having to be at court at a certain day and then just being disappointed and having it stretched out and not really feel like you're getting any momentum. So I can imagine how stressful and frustrating that must be for your clients. And, and another thing about when you are with a mediator, and I want you to sort of talk through this, if you're going through the court process, I would imagine privacy would be potentially an issue. If someone either was of a higher profile and didn't want people knowing sort of the details of their case, or maybe if they had a complicated financial situation, or maybe there was something they were embarrassed about, or maybe they were trying to get a certain job and didn't want people to look that up. So how does having a mediator affect the privacy of divorce?
Yeah. So in the American system, litigation is public, which is a good thing. We want it to be public for a lot of different reasons. Unfortunately, that includes the divorce process. So when you are going through divorce and you're litigating your divorce in court, all of those documents from your case do become public. All the court orders that the judge enters, possibly exhibits that are filed as part of motions, the final orders, the final judgments that the judge signs off on to finalize your case. And a lot of people don't want that to be exposed, that sort of detail. How much money are you making every year? What's the exact schedule that you're using with your kids? How much money do you have to pay to your spouse per month? Like, who wants to really have that information out there? I know that I wouldn't. And one of the ways to avoid that is mediation, because it's completely confidential. It's completely private. And when you do come up with a final agreement and you do sign off on that marital settlement agreement, when you finalize that marital settlement agreement with the judge will actually only do what's called incorporated into the public record by reference. And so the judge will say, okay, I'm approving this marital settlement agreement, MSA as we call it, but we're not going to put it into the public record. So it's a really great way for us to keep our private lives private. So another reason to choose the mediation route, if at all possible.
I imagine most of your clients don't even think about that, to be honest, like that's probably not one of the first things they're thinking about. And when it comes down to that fact, I'm sure so many people would just not want that information out there. And, we talked a little bit about flexibility with your schedule and your time, because if you're having that mediator, making it on what days work for you as opposed to the court. But there's other flexibility that mediation allows. And that kind of comes with some of the solutions. So when you were talking through that list of things that maybe you're going through that the mediator is keeping you on track, my understanding is you're also able to, make your own solutions and have conversations that maybe might work for the couple, which would be a different result if you were going into litigation.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, as busy professionals, we need flexibility in our scheduling. And again, like we talked about, that is something mediation can offer, and it can be done through Zoom even. So that flexibility is one part. But like you said, creative solutions, flexibility and solutions. That is something that people don't understand, that you lose that when your case is litigated, because you're handing it over to a judge. And let's just compare the two. On one hand, you have mediation where you and your spouse are sitting down and your lives so intimately and what's going to work for you and what's going to work for the kids. And so you're working through those things and you can bring up pros and cons and figure it out together. On the other hand, if your case goes to trial, it's a judge deciding what your schedule is going to be. It's someone who literally only knows what they've learned during that trial about your life. And a judge can't possibly know enough to make a schedule that truly makes sense for you. So when we do mediation, we really empower ourselves as a co-parenting couple or as spouses to figure out solutions that are truly flexible and fit our own unique situations.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I know situations of, friends who, had to go to court. And I remember just walking through that process with them through litigation and it being so frustrating when the judge would come up with an answer, because that was exactly how they felt but this judge doesn't know our situation. And I know that can just be, it can really be shattering, because nobody's life is one size fits all, right? I mean, we all have very particular things that are going to work for ourselves. Mm-hmm. So then obviously we're looking to reduce conflict. We're looking to reduce stress, and also, the kids. So we're trying to make better decisions and for the kids. So I would imagine that, mediation is going to really help maybe create a better solution for all of those areas, like the stress of everything, benefits for the kids? How do you sort of see that in mediation?
Greer, let me count the ways. It's mediation is so much better for the kids. And if you do have kids and you're going through a divorce, I think for 99.9% of us, keeping the kids out of it, getting them through the divorce process as intact and whole and safe and healthy as possible is our number one goal. And so if we do go to court, if we do litigate this, if we can't just talk it out with our spouse through mediation, then other professionals start getting involved. You'll probably hear terms like guardian ad litem, which is another attorney that could get involved, that could be talking to your kids, or in-camera interviews. That's where your kids might even have to go in and talk to a judge, and it's really can be stressful and takes a long time. That's one aspect of it. And then the judge, if you do litigate, making these decisions for you, saying, you know what, you guys, you haven't been able to figure it out, so here's the schedule you're going to use. The likelihood that that schedule actually works and doesn't cause conflict and doesn't require you to go back to court is much lower than if you do go to mediation and you and your spouse spend the time to really work through your issues, work through your conflict, and find some areas of compromise. If you do that work in mediation and you come up with an agreement, guess what? Both of you are really going to feel ownership over it because you did agree on it. And there's a much bigger likelihood that it's going to work now. And if it needs to change, there's a much better likelihood that you've set the groundwork. You've already done the work in coming up with the agreement once. You could probably modify it and come up with another one and avoid court altogether. The more you avoid court, the better it is for the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously not the kids' fault, and they're going through enough on their own. So it's just so much better when parents can come to a solution together. And I'm sure, have you seen too that when people are able to get together with a mediator, come up with some of these plans, like, are they able to sort of stick to that plan a little bit better? Because it seems like if the court was to order a plan as opposed to the two people deciding, what plan is best for them, in a lot of ways, it feels like that plan's going to probably have a better chance of sticking.
Yeah. I mean, imagine that you go through this entirely stressful, long litigation process, and at the end, the judge orders that you have some particular schedule. Maybe it's some every other weekend plan, or, some schedule that doesn't really align with your job. You're going to have a bunch of resentment, and you're going to kind of do the schedule to start because you're afraid of what the judge is going to do if you don't follow it. And that resentment is going to bleed out into your interactions with the other parent, and it can get really petty and problematic. And what we need actually is you and the other parent to have goodwill and to feel like you've accomplished something together. And that's what you can do in mediation, is that you can really work through problems together and start to see like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we're not great at being husband and wife, but we can actually figure this out together. We can co-parent together once we get past the initial emotions of the breakup. And mediation can really create the context that is good for co-parenting.
Well, I think the benefits are endless, honestly, for mediation. It just sounds like if the couple is able to communicate well and have this conversation, that there really is a big incentive to try to settle, through mediation. So how do you know when a client is a good fit for mediation?
Yeah, the best indicator of whether or not a client is a good fit for mediation is that they are willing to communicate. It's so, we do get cases where there is the emotional temperature is running so hot that the parties can't communicate at all. And sometimes the best thing that we can do is just slow down the process and give the parties time to kind of come down from that emotional state and then we can try mediation. But if we get a client that we can tell wants to work it out, understands that they do have to work it out, that there is going to have to be some tough conversations in order to figure this out, then we oftentimes recommend that we try mediation before we go the litigation route.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you say you sort of slow down the process, if the tensions are high, because we all know that time is the greatest healer. And if you can just get a little time under your belt, then maybe people would be able to talk through it. But again, you're adding time, which is valuable, and you're continuing to add costs. So it's just sort of an interesting thing, but I like that tactic that sometimes you may have to do that.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we're kind of slowing it down in order to speed it up. Slowing it down by a month in order to let that emotional temperature come down might save you 12 months of litigation. So everyone, you're in that place where you're like, I want to get divorced. I can't stand to be around this person anymore. But that sort of urgency can sometimes derail things. So yes, slowing down may actually make your divorce go faster.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a really interesting point. Now, obviously, we got to be realistic. We're always trying to be positive, and we're looking at best case scenario. And that's what we've been talking about so far with mediation. But at times, like you mentioned, there's going to be some high conflict situations. So what is your approach, when, other than the slowing it down, when you realize either your client, the other client, this is not going well, and it might not be a great fit?
Yeah, mediation can work in a wide variety of circumstances. It can even work in high conflict situations. But if it is very high conflict, there's a couple of things that we do need to do. One, like we just talked about, we may need to slow it down so the emotional temperature can come down. Two, there's something called attorney-assisted mediation, where it might make sense to actually have the attorneys there next to the parties so that they feel like there isn't so much of a power imbalance, because oftentimes these high conflict situations can come from one party maybe feeling like the other party's taking advantage of them, or that, they don't have as much ability to change the situation. And so having their attorney next to them in mediation can change that. But mediation isn't always going to work. It's not some magic pill that we can just throw every case at mediation and it's going to resolve itself. We don't recommend it in cases where there is some huge power imbalance that not even an attorney sitting next to you can resolve, or in situations where there's domestic violence or something like that. Those situations really aren't appropriate for mediation. And so we need to steer them away and try some alternative route. And sometimes the only way to go in those situations is litigation, and to just get the case through the court system as efficiently as possible while defending our client's rights.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if someone feels threatened or controlled, then mediation might not be the right fit, because they're just not on the same playing field, right?
Yeah.
And that makes it tough. But maybe other aspects that maybe shows you that mediation is a good fit, if there are kids involved. What type of signs will you see that maybe they could co-parent, or they could find some flexible and creative solutions to agree upon?
Yeah, if a client comes to us and right off the bat, they're saying, I just want to get the kids through this. I know that, we might not have been good romantic partners, but we actually, he actually is a great dad, or she's a great mom, or they're saying things like, I don't want to take the kids away from him. I want to make sure that he gets half the time or she gets half the time. Those are signs that we're working with someone who really understands that the ultimate goal here is just to change the relationship from a romantic one into a co-parenting partnership. And if those signs are there, then mediation can work without a doubt. I mean, it's one of the best vehicles for two people who are committed. They may have a little hurt inside of them. There may be some resentment, some anger, but they can work through that in order to make the kids transition as easy as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I can attest for myself and also some other people that I know been through divorce and were able to either decide together or through mediation. It really was able to help build the foundation of co-parenting a lot better, because I think you felt like we've both agreed, we're both on the same playing field, as opposed to maybe a judge deciding something like that. I think that it kind of creeps in a little more bitterness and anger that takes maybe a little bit more time to get past. So I always think that's great to have that foundation. And Bobby, what about complicated financial situations? So, I imagine that sometimes clients feel like, well, I'm nervous about going to mediation for that because our financial situation is complicated. How do you sort of approach that part of mediation?
Yeah, financial complexity isn't as difficult to handle in the mediation context as you would think. If we have a financially complex situation, we want to break it down into kind of the simplest parts of it. We're going to want to help our client get an understanding of their own. Sometimes, we may have a client that is very financially fluent. They understand their financial picture backwards and forwards, or we might get a client that really doesn't. They haven't had their hands on the financial picture of the entire marriage, and so we need to get them up to speed. We can do that, one, by walking through the financials as their attorney with them and helping them understand the financial picture. And then two, sometimes we need financial experts to come in and give us an overview, give us an expert opinion on the value of a business, or, how much a certain estate might be worth based on the different financial complexities that are involved. Once we have experts come in, it's an expert's job to break things down into layman's terms and help us understand how much, what a complex financial situation is, and every single little thing. So like if we have a really complicated business with multiple entities involved, an expert can come in and give it an overall valuation and can say, okay, one of the spouses owns this business. Is this business worth anything if it were sold or if this spouse wasn't involved? Because sometimes a business isn't. And so to understand those sorts of aspects, we get experts involved, we understand it better, and then we can go into mediation and negotiate a lot better.
Well, even though the assets can be complicated, it does sound like it's not anything that cannot be handled through mediation, which is very encouraging. So those are a lot of the benefits, but, realistically, we know that there are times where mediation maybe is not a great option. And we mentioned a little bit before about some of the power imbalances, but I know there's additional ones. So could you sort of talk through some of maybe the red flags that maybe someone would not be a great fit for mediation?
Yeah, mediation can be tough if there is not a fundamental level of trust between the parties. If there hasn't been certain transparency during the marriage, there hasn't been financial transparency, there hasn't been romantic transparency. If trust has eroded to a certain degree, then mediation is really going to have a hard time working, because anything that one party says, the other party is going to find suspect, and it's hard to get negotiation traction in that sort of situation. And again, like you said, if there's a power imbalance between the parties, then getting mediation to really work is tough, because one party might be threatened by the other one. Maybe one side has a family that's really intimidating, or has a bunch of family, and the other side doesn't, or maybe there is a history of domestic violence. Those sorts of situations can be very intimidating, and mediation just won't work a lot of the time. And again, we try to steer people away from mediation in those contexts. And then the last one is, if either party doesn't want to compromise. I mean, mediation and coming to an agreement in the divorce process is all about compromise. you're never going to get the agreement that you want exactly. And there's an expression that a lot of divorce attorneys use, which is a good agreement is the one that both parties are a little disappointed with. And that's a kind of a way of saying, listen, you're not going to get everything that you want. And so if we get a client that is kind of like it's my way or the highway, then we know that mediation isn't going to work right off the bat. But for the majority of people, mediation is one of the best options to get through the process.
Yeah. Well, Bobby, gosh, we've covered so much today about mediation, really just talking about what it is, all of the benefits, someone or a couple that might be a good fit for it, and then also, potentially couples that are not a good fit for it. And truly, we're still just scratching the surface. So when we come back next time, we're going to talk really through the step-by-step process, how long it's going to actually take, and then, to be finalized for your divorce and a few more of those details. But is there anything else today that you want to mention about mediation that we haven't covered?
I just want to encourage people again to always look to try to resolve their case outside of the court system. The court system is just not an efficient way to get through the divorce process. So whether it's sitting down at your dining room table or sitting down with a mediator in order to continue that conversation, that's what you should be doing if you want to get through the divorce process as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Well, Bobby, thanks so much for being here with me today with all of your knowledge. I learned a lot about mediation. And if you enjoyed this video, we would love if you would like, share, comment, and go ahead and subscribe to our Illinois Divorce TV YouTube channel. We would love that. If you have any topics you want us to cover, make sure to let us know, because we really are here for you to answer any and all of your divorce questions. So thanks so much for being here, and we will be back next time for another episode of the Illinois Divorce Guide Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Illinois Divorce Guide Podcast. We hope today's episode gave you clarity and support as you move forward on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Tune in next week for more insights and expert advice on the Illinois Divorce Guide Podcast.